Coming up on episode 3 of Patriots Uncovered, Dan and I discuss some potential defensive draft targets for the Patriots, as well as cover some potential running back draft targets as well. Let's roll. This episode of Patriots Uncovered is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Discover the thrill of fantasy sports like never before with Underdog Fantasy. Are you ready to take your fantasy sports experience to new heights? Look no further than Underdog Fantasy, where the fantasy football season never stops. Whether you're a seasoned fantasy veteran or just getting started, Underdog Fantasy has something for everyone. Are you looking to get your dynasty startup draft fix without any league management? Head on over to underdogfantasy.com and check out their best ball contests. The Big Board is a pre-NFL draft best ball contest that includes all incoming rookies in the available player pool. You can get in on the action and start drafting your team for as little as $10 with up to $2 million available in total prize money. Looking for something with a bit higher stakes? Underdog has you covered. The biggest board is a $100 entry best ball contest with up to $150,000 in total prize money. Enjoy the convenience of playing on the go with Underdog Fantasy's user-friendly mobile app. Draft, manage your teams, and track live scores effortlessly from your smartphone or tablet. Join thousands of fantasy sports enthusiasts who are already experiencing the thrill of Underdog Fantasy. Sign up today with promo code UNDROPPABLE, and you'll get your first deposit matched up to $100. Don't miss out on the action and start drafting your way to victory. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com now and elevate your fantasy sports journey. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Patriots Uncovered. Dan, how you doing, man?
Feeling good, man. Feeling good. I had a scrimmage yesterday, so I was outside all day, and it was rough. It was so cold and windy, but happy to be here. Happy to be talking Patriots.
Yeah, man, I feel like we got a little bit of tease with spring there. Now, these past few days been a little bit raw out there, but no, guys, we're happy to be back with you here. So this is episode 3. We're going to kick off some of the draft stuff that we want to cover for the New England Patriots here. So one of the things that we're going to be doing here over the course of the next couple of weeks is kind of picking some position groups and talking through them, kind of piece by piece, and looking at some potential draft targets for the Pats here up in this upcoming 2024 draft. So one of the position groups, or a couple of the position groups that we wanted to start with today was the defensive side of the ball. Really look at, some of the targets that are likely going to be later on in the draft. Because Dan, I think you can kind of agree here. Defense is not necessarily something that is a dire need for us right now. And we're probably going to be focusing more of our attention on the offensive side of the ball, but a couple guys that you like coming in here, right?
Yeah, same page. As much as, you always need to build a full, complete team. I think you and I and pretty much the entirety of Patriots Nation is expecting 0 defensive players in the first few rounds. So that's kind of where our mindset was, looking at probably around round 4 later and just seeing who can we find that's value, that's good, that provides good depth, but they're not the preeminent positions of need by any means.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's really no secret that, we need a dire infusion of offensive skill talent. So that's one of the things that we just kind of wanted to set up for the discussion today, right? Was, really we're attacking this thing in mind with that we're going to be going the offensive side of the ball, those first likely 3 picks, depending on how the draft falls there. So really the targets that we started to look at for some of the defensive guys here are really in, round 4 and onward. And we'll get into some running backs as well, kind of later on in the draft. So, Dan, if we kind of start there, right, I think, one of the things that we were kind of discussing beforehand here and looking at, some of the stuff with PFF as far as team needs and everything like that, and we could probably agree here, edge is an area of need or an area that we probably need to look at here. So do you want to just kind of talk through some of the group that we have right now and then start to get into some of the potential targets that we're thinking about?
Yeah, when you look at like the line as a whole, like we have like a really great base with Barmore and Godshaw. Keon White looked, promising. He's kind of he's a freak, right? Dietrich Wise. I like the Armon Watts guy as a nice little depth piece that we signed. Daniel Ukali. So like we have like a set base, which I think is good. So we do have a couple of 29-year-olds in there, which is not super old by any means. But you start to Godcha in theory, right? I guess is someone that cap casualty, but I doubt it because we just don't need the cap space.
Yep.
Helping just getting a little bit younger, a little infusion, more towards the back end, I think is a good place for us to get. We don't have to rush anybody in by any means, and so that's where it's that's going to be the story, honestly, for a lot of the defensive side is just getting in some youth to see how it works out. But they're just it's not the we don't need a first round edge by any means.
Exactly. I mean, look, when we saw kind of Barmore really get back into form last year, that was
Yeah.
so good to see from a defensive standpoint. We kind of talked a little bit about it on that first show, is what DeMarcus Covington has kind of meant to some of the guys on that defensive line there. So it will be curious to kind of see, some of the guys that they're looking at to bring in here. Because there is some solid guys in that group now, particularly I think the guy you mentioned, Keon White, probably has some Pats fans excited with kind of that freak that he is. Love to see them this past draft in 2023 kind of really shift towards bringing in some of those kind of freaky guys, right? White
Mhm.
being a really high RAS guy. So why don't we just kind of hop into, let's start with defensive tackle, right? I think that's one place that we could probably look at first. As you mentioned, Godshaw's getting up there a little bit, but we've got Barmore, but a potential guy that we could, look at for the future to pair with Barmore, if we bring him on or keep him on with an extension, who's somebody you're looking at from a defensive tackle standpoint, Dan?
Yeah, so one guy that kind of caught my eye was Dwayne Carter, tackle from Duke, 6'3", 305. So, perfectly fine size there. One of the things that I saw that I loved, or is actually I was watching some clips about him and I just heard it, from the announcers. He's a 3-time captain, which for me is something that I love. It's obviously not the end all be all, but right, the idea is, and kind of you heard that coaches talk about like building the culture that they want to build, right? And we've had guys like Slater for all these years that like they're just the ultimate like team culture type of guy. So someone that's a 3-time captain, I think is fantastic. I think that speaks volumes to who he is as a leader, which again, you bring him into the building, those are all good things. From the clips that I've seen from him, spends most of his time inside, but did bounce outside to edge here and there, which was really good. Seemed to shed tackles, decently well.
Yep.
He's like a 4th round type draft projection guy, right? So again, it's not someone that you're gonna be like, holy shit, Dwayne Carter, this is amazing.
Yeah.
But it's one of those guys that just looking at him on film, a lot of good hustle plays, things like that. Someone that I like. That's someone that caught my eye.
Yeah, no, and I think that's something to keep in mind kind of as we're discussing some of these guys today, right? Like obviously the guys that we're going to be talking about mainly are those kind of depth pieces, right? Whenever you kind
Mhm.
of start looking in that fourth round, the hit rates get quite a bit lower. So, these aren't guys that we're going to be looking to make an impact here on day one. It's more, get them in the building. What do they look like? Can they work in our system? Can they develop under DeMarcus and Gerard? And look, I think to your point, a 3-time captain who does have a decent amount of let's call it moves in his bag from a pass rush perspective for a
Mhm.
defensive tackle. That was really nice to see. And it's not like he's stout against the run, but he's
Yep.
also not a liability against the run either. So yeah, he's definitely somebody that I would be interested in from a nice depth piece, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's someone, and again, that's really what we're looking for, and they don't have
Yeah.
to be perfect prospects. They're day 3 guys ideally,
Yep.
and right, that's what our coaches are for. So bring them
Exactly.
in, character guys that have some skill that we can then refine and work with. So that's how I look at this whole defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's kind of stick with that defensive tackle slash kind of nose tackle position, right?
Mhm.
So, another McKinley Jackson
Yeah,
out of A&M,
big boy.
bigger guy. Yeah, bigger guy. 6'1", just about 330. And right now, Dan, I think he's projected to be about a fourth round pick. But what did you kind of like about him?
Yeah, same thing. He was a 2-time captain, so there we go.
Yep.
There's a little theme there for the first 2 guys. But again, yeah, another big body type guy. Even though he's 6'1", watching some of the clips, you'd be like, oh, there's the big guy on the line. So you can kind of like pick him out, which was kind of cool against all the other A&M guys. But very similar. Is he the ideal nose tackle? It seems like it's probably not. But again, a big body on the interior line that can rotate in. I is someone that I liked.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the notes that I read on PFF as I was kind of scouting up on this guy a little bit was one of his strengths was the slipperiest 330 pounder you'll ever see. So anytime you hear that about a big guy,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's a little bit intriguing, right?
Yep.
So generating pressure from the middle. Is something that that's can be the Achilles heel for some of these better quarterbacks,
Mhm.
specifically some of the pocket quarterbacks, right? We saw that for years with that's how you got to Brady, right? And generate
Yeah.
that pressure up the middle. So, bringing somebody like him in, if that coaching staff can coach somebody like him up, it really could kind of create a nice presence of him and Barmore in the middle for kind of some years to come there.
Yeah. And then I just saw I was looking at it's on Pat's Pulpit, but just like their top 30 visit type stuff. It looks like they also had a visit with Gabe Hall from Baylor.
Okay.
Um 6'5". Say they have projects as a more of a package player, but a likely day 3 pick, which again is kind of what we're looking at. Is
Yep.
just who are these guys that we can bring in, provide some depth, right? As we build them up, that'd be something different. But another day 3 guy from
Absolutely.
Baylor.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, depth pieces is probably going to be a running theme here with this group,
Yep.
right? So let's kick it over to Edge because I think while we brought Uche back, we still have some other depth pieces like Dietrich Wise. You mentioned kind of what we saw out of Armin Watts, but yeah, really kind of Uche coming back was kind of that big edge move for us. But really, he's back on that 1 year deal, Dan. Right? We
Yep.
kind of talked about that in the past episode. So really, I do think they need to think about what life looks like in the future for at the edge position there.
Yeah.
And granted, you're not going to be spending it on kind of one of those top tier guys, but who's a guy that has kind of caught your eye from an edge perspective?
Yeah, this guy is actually like we were talking about before. We both loved him. It's a name that we both came up with.
Yeah,
Muhammad Kamara from
yeah,
Colorado State. 6'1", 248. So yeah, he's definitely on the smaller side, especially for an edge. But 250 isn't tiny. But
no,
you know, going up against tackles, it's interesting. But his profile is so funny. Right. If you look at his RAS card, it's like all super bright green because he's a freak athlete, then it's just like
yeah,
he's super small. And
yeah,
his size is not ideal, but his production is insane. So career 45 and a half tackles for loss, 30 and a half sacks, 5 forced fumbles. Like the dude just produces.
yeah.
And right then maybe you get it's that guy, the smaller guy with a chip on his shoulder, but just has an insane motor. Sign me up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of feels like those are the types of guys that Mayo and
Mhm.
DeMarcus are going to be looking to bring in is kind of those high motor guys. I think we saw it with Keon, right?
Yep.
Granted, you could tie that back to the Bill regime and everything like that, but high motor guys that are freaky athletic, I think is kind of how the NFL has started to shift towards as well.
Mhm.
So really infusing that defensive line / edge with a little bit more kind of that freaky athlete nature would be really nice to see, especially after kind of what we saw with Keon there his rookie year. To keep going with some of the edge guys, I mean, one of the guys that is kind of he could potentially be in our range, Javon Solomon out of Troy.
Mhm.
Again, very similar to Kamara from a size perspective, right? I think 6'2", about 245, but really a nice athlete. And I think yes, he went to Troy, so it's not like he was an SEC guy or anything like that. But he led the FBS last year in sacks. So when you look at from a production standpoint, yes, these guys are maybe with Colorado State and Kamara, and Troy with somebody like Solomon, some smaller schools, but the production is there, right?
Mhm.
So and there's an explosiveness to his game. He's got some really nice pass moves. Some of his weaknesses at times where he will, as far from a length perspective, given that he's on that shorter side and it's 6'2", 245, may struggle with some longer tackles. But look, again, we're looking for, let's call it some upside guys, right? At this point,
Yep.
guys that kind of can develop. We're not asking him to be an impact player here in year one. So if he can come in and really kind of develop under that, the Marcus Gerard kind of front there, he's somebody that I could be really interested in down the line for us.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It is interesting, and not to go totally off, kilter of what you're talking about. It looks like we've also met with both the UCLA edges. I'm gonna butcher his first name, the Latude guy, who's a first
Yep.
round rank, which is interesting. I think that would send people up the wall, but that means a trade back.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then Gabriel Murphy is someone that we've also met with. So right, if you kind of look at their meetings and kind of hash it out, they are looking at that defensive side. Again, I don't think either of us or a lot of people want a high-end draft capital for those
Yep.
positions. But right, again, if you just look at their meetings, look at what the teams are telling us, they are going to make those picks. So right,
Yeah.
they realize they still have to build up the entire team there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Murphy was a guy for me that was on my list.
Yep.
If we kind of look at some of the guys that we've talked about up until this point in Kamara and Solomon, kind of
Mhm.
on that smaller side, Murphy gives you a little bit more
Yep.
size, right? So 6'3", 260.
Mhm.
Again, he was, when you talk about like fast hands, initial contact, really kind of a bull rusher. Whereas like you looked at Latu on the other
Mhm.
side at UCLA, really bendy,
Mhm.
more of an explosive player. So they won in different ways, but
Mhm.
given kind of what he's put together from a production standpoint, some of the pass rush moves that he does have in his bag, and so one of the things that just kept kind of coming out as I'm reading about this guy is his hand speed and usage, right? So
Yep.
if he's not maybe the most athletic guy, but he's able to kind of make up for that with some really nice hand speed slash usage of those hands against some of those tackles, then he's another guy that I could definitely be, on getting on board with here.
Yeah, and with a PFF rank of 81, that is kind of into that 3rd round range where it's okay, right?
Yep.
Hopefully at least those first 2 are some offensive infusion, then it's like, "All right, this is a difference maker that, in round 3 that we could get." I'd be okay with it. Nothing
Yeah,
really to
exactly. Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of it, Dan, is it's really going to be interesting to see how those first two rounds kind of set the rest of the board, right? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are pretty much on the board that it's going to be extremely offensive skill position heavy early on.
Mhm.
Whether that's a combination of the running backs as well as, I mean, there's some people out there that think there could be up to 6 or 7 wide receivers in the first round, right? So
Yep.
when you think about potentially 4 quarterbacks going in the first round, not counting somebody like Bo Nix, right? Like if we just take the top 4 with McCarthy and everything like that,
Mhm.
let's call 6 wide receivers and then let's throw in Brock Bowers, right? Like that's 11 guys out of 32 picks that,
Yeah.
you know, some defensive talent is going to get pushed down the board, right?
Yep.
So, and that'll be interesting to kind of see how this goes. I did a couple mocks on PFF earlier today, and there was a scenario where, you know, Gabriel Murphy does fall, right? So
Mhm.
whether, does he fall enough where they jump up a couple picks and grab somebody like that? We'll see.
Yep.
And I think as we kind of get into subsequent episodes here, Dan, I think we'd probably lean tackle in the 3rd round, but that's not to
Mhm.
say that if a defensive kind of playmaker or an impact player jumped into our laps in round 3, we wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it, to your point.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is we're taking this as our guy at we stick at pick 3, we stick at
Yeah.
34, which, as we all know, as Patriots fans, we rarely stick. That it might be a Bill thing, but it's been in the building for so long. The amount of moves that could lead up to this, who the hell knows?
I know. I'm still it's funny, man, because when we first started talking about this, kind of before in previous shows as well as just kind of off air as well, I was dead set on not moving out of the pick earlier
Mhm.
on. And look, if May's there, I'm probably still dead set against it.
Yep.
But even before, like if May wasn't there, I was like, you know what, screw it, let's just take Jaden Daniels. And I think I have kind of pivoted off that a little bit.
Yep.
You and I have discussed this a little bit. So if that's the case, right? If a lot of what we're seeing is smoke screen, whether it's Washington doesn't end up going Jaden Daniels the 2 and ends up taking May or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, then I kind of am open to some potential packages to move down, right?
Yep.
Because one thing that we mentioned in previous episodes, Dan, and it's one thing I kind of wanted to touch on here too, was look, there's a lot of people out there right now saying last year was a rebuild year.
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily think that's fair because we went into last year not thinking it was a rebuild, right? Like
No.
I don't think just because you have a bad season makes it, oh, that was a rebuild year,
Yep.
because we did not go into last year with like a rebuild in mind.
No, that was the whole talking point. It was like, "Oh, we got Bill O'Brien back. Offense is gonna be set. Defense is," and it did not work that way. But yeah, no, the people were going into last season thinking that we could sneak into the playoffs.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that's where I just kind of want to make sure that, like, look, this is not the second year, in my opinion, at least. And I think you're kind of that same note. This is not the second year of a rebuild for me,
Yeah,
right?
this
So
is year
that's why I'm not, this is year one, right?
Yeah,
So that's why I'm not in a rush to let's try and fix it all year one, because the reality is it's not going to happen, right?
yep,
And it doesn't really matter. You can come away from this draft with an A plus draft, and you're still likely not competing with the likes of, the top tier AFC East teams, right? So let's build this the right way. And that's why I'm a little bit more open to, okay, if we move out of 3, what does that look like? And then really, what does that do for the rest of the draft? Can we pick up some more impact guys on, from a tackle perspective, and then start to build out other places on both sides of the ball?
yep. Yeah, and even looking at potential free agents for next year, right? If you wanna talk about year 2 of the redraft, and obviously, you know, players get tagged. The free agency class never looks as good as it actually is.
Sure.
But, it's there's gonna be guys that are out there next year too, where you don't have to just blow everything year 1, right? We're like we
Yep.
talked about last episode, we don't have to spend all $100 million in cap space right away. Like, it's okay. So, I'm with you on that. It's year 1 of the rebuild. Unfortunately, yeah, we just have to it might be a trade down, trade down, trade down, and then 2025 quarterbacks, here we go, which is not super exciting by any means, but
No, I know.
it could be within the realm.
Well, I'll
But
tell
Dan
you what. Yeah. So it's really funny you just said that, because I'll tell you what, man. After that mock that I kind of did earlier, where it
Mhm,
was really tackle focused, grab somebody like Troy Franklin here, really kind of shore up the offensive line as well as infuse some skill position guys. It really does seem like that somebody like Dak Prescott might be available next year at this point, right? So,
yeah,
like, if you do end up trading down and you're able to acquire draft capital and, kind of build for the future, who knows what's going to happen next year. So again, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So I just don't want to be in a rush to kind of fix this.
yep,
um, if we get back to kind of like moving off some of the defensive line guys, right? I
yep,
think that kind of covers some really nice potential targets, some high upside guys. If we think about linebackers, right? Like, why don't
mhm.
you take us through kind of who we've got right now, and then maybe, just give the people a quick updated depth chart, and then really just kind of talk about maybe somebody that you're kind of looking at for us.
Yeah, so, right, we look at it, Judon, Anthony Jennings, Tavai, Juwan Bentley, um, the free agency guys, and Taki. We have obviously Uche. I'm not exactly sure. I think technically Marte Mapu fits in there, but he's like that weird defensive hybrid
Yeah.
athlete, if you want to use the college football term. Who knows where he goes? But
Yeah.
we have some guys there. A couple guys are a little bit older. Obviously, Judon kind of towards the top there. But again, Tavai was a absolute like one of the very few bright spots. He was fun to watch last year, and so like we have again a lot of like good potential starters. But one guy I was looking at was Cedric Gray, linebacker from UNC, over 8 RAS score, which was nice. Um, though so a lot of his draft projections are like the 4th or 5th round, but
Yep.
the more I read about this linebacker class, it seems pretty weak. So he's a guy that has played a lot, shows a lot of good tape, is a good athlete. I feel like he might get pushed up even into a round 3 just because there's not a lot of great linebackers where I don't know if that's like our best. I'd rather take the Gabriel Murphy or whatever, like the edge in round 3 than maybe Cedric Gray as the linebacker. But he's someone that if he gets into that 4th round, I'd be all over. He seems like a really good athlete and he has a good resume.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was just pulling up the big board here as you were talking, and if we just to kind of give the people an idea of what we're looking at from a really a lack of depth perspective that you kind of mentioned. Really the number one linebacker that they have right now is on the big board at number 26, and that's Peyton Wilson out of NC State.
Yeah,
Um, you got
noted
to go all the way
linebacker.
down. Yeah,
Big
you got to go
school,
all the
big
way
linebacker.
down. Yeah.
Linebacker you.
Yep. You got to go all the way down to 62. Edgerrin Cooper for Texas A&M.
Yeah.
to find the next linebacker there, right? So you've got a little pocket there with Edgerrin Cooper at 62, Junior Colson out of Michigan at 66, and then Jeremiah Trotter at 88, and that's the one name where
Mhm.
in those couple mocks that I did, he did fall a couple times. Look,
Yep.
he's got name recognition. He comes from a really strong NFL bloodline.
Yep.
Where look, if somebody like that is potentially falls, obviously he's got a lack of length and size.
Yep.
6 feet 230, but by all accounts are like from an IQ perspective, the dude is like incredibly smart, right?
Yep.
So if somebody like that were to fall, again, it's really just kind of looking at the board and seeing how it plays out, right? And look, maybe in this range, Dan, that we're talking about, if we do end up moving down in that first round and picking up some later picks, maybe somebody like this becomes a little bit more realistic for us.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and it's one of those where, right, it's not a great class, so, like, guys will get pushed up, and I don't think we're in the position to, like, go reach on, like, "Oh, he's probably an early 4th, but we'll take him in the mid-3rd because we really like him." It's like, again, I'm not in the move up range of, like, let's go
Yeah.
attack this, like, so-so guy just because there's less depth behind him. We really need to just let the board fall to us as much as we humanly can.
Yeah, I think the best player available approach is something that, and look, I think Elliot Wolf is probably bringing some of that over with some of the
Yes.
draft strategies that he's talked about. Bringing kind of that grading system over from Green Bay. And look, if we do kind of think about that, Green Bay has done a nice job at bringing in some guys, over
Mhm.
these last few years. I really like what they've done on both sides of the ball, right?
Yep.
So if we do kind of take that approach, it does seem like linebacker might not even be in the conversation for us, and which I'm fine with, right? I think some of the guys that you mentioned, like with Tavai, but also seeing the versatility of somebody like Mapu,
Mhm.
right, who can kind of come up and down like that. We do have some flexibility there,
Yep.
so it's not necessarily a position that like, look, we got to go get somebody right now.
Yeah. Yeah, other than
Um,
that, I just again, it's kind of a theme, and it might be a cop out, but for, like, both of us, or at least for myself, it's just like, these are depth people. We
yeah.
just
And that's how we wanted to start off this draft season kind of coverage, right? Is like, look, we wanted to make sure that we're covering all our bases,
Mhm.
and really just taking a look at potentially, all these different guys that could be an option for the Patriots at some point, right? So, and really we wanted to kind of structure this where as we're leading into the draft, we start really talking about those high impact positions where
Mhm.
Drake May's pro day is coming up in 2 weeks here, or in 2 days here, right? So we really kind of wanted to tailor it to, as we start to see that quarterback story play out over the course of the next couple weeks, that maybe dictates some of the rest of the board and how we go and how we can talk
Mhm.
about some of the offensive line and wide receiver moves, right? So
Yeah. And at
um
and at the end of the day, if we're ideally looking at these guys as day 3 picks, like, arguing over day 3 picks is why would you do that?
exactly.
Right? The hit rate on any of these guys is so low that,
I
like,
know.
yeah, I could love, Tommy Eichenberg, but, PFA, right? Like,
Yeah,
the 4th
I
round
know.
pick. What are we doing?
Exactly. um Let's jump to corner. I
Mhm.
think, obviously last year, having Gonzo fall into our laps was an absolute, like,
Thank you,
blessing.
Washington.
Yeah, seriously, thank you. Um,
Could Washington do it again? 2 years in a
let's
row.
hope
Give us our
let's hope
guy.
they can. Let's hope they can, man. Shout out Washington.
Yeah.
Um, No, I think honestly, you kind of see it in some of the intro there about how we wanted to include him because we're so excited about him. And I think,
Mhm.
hearing some of the stuff that Tyreek said about him, his even just in his rookie year,
Yeah.
like the length that he has, the speed that he has, how fast he was able to pick up some of that defense and really kind of become the number one corner for us almost right off the
Yeah.
bat, is something that was just super exciting to see. Right. So, and then obviously we get somebody like Marcus Jones back, right? Really
Yes.
kind of a guy that can impact us, make an impact for us on multiple fronts. We saw him used on. I think we'd like to address actual wide receiver Dan, but we have seen
Yes.
him. We,
Yes.
we have seen him used on the offensive side of the ball a little bit in the past, but one of the things that I thought it was pretty interesting, with some of the rule change today,
Mm,
um,
yep.
is with the kickoff, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of talk about potentially what that can do for a guy like Marcus Jones, and maybe just give the people a quick rundown of some of the kickoff changes that we saw today?
Yeah, I think we went over that the first episode maybe or the second episode, talking about how like there's like the kicking zone now, and the way the guys line up is that XFL model.
Yep.
And there was a really cool thread that I retweeted earlier. Talks about like it's going to be less about just like straight up explosive returning, but more of like, can you find lanes and like understanding like that the more of the offensive skill set of like as a wide receiver, as a running back, how to run off tackles, how to use like the different setups and things like that. And I think that's huge for Marcus Jones. Like we saw him
Yep.
get the ball and move into space and just take off and make these big time plays. This kickoff thing could be massive for him. He could be one of the
Yeah.
better guys in the league just because how good he already was. So getting him back, one, defensively is going to be very important, but he could as long as he stays the number one returner, maybe Jalen Reagor, who knows? But
Yep.
like those are two players, and especially Marcus Jones in my mind, that could feast on this new model, which could be very exciting because God, we need special teams help.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, honestly, it reminds me, because we saw the impact that he can make in the punt return game, right?
Yeah.
That returning that kick to essentially win the game against the Jets.
Yep.
And when you look at some of the XFL highlights and everything like that, it almost does feel a lot more like a punt return than it does a kickoff
Yes.
return, right? And to your point, following blocks, finding lanes, like really kind of using the vision, as opposed to just hitting one little seam and trying to break it, right?
Yeah, and
Like
just
there
having elite
does.
speed. Yep.
Exactly. So, yeah, be really interesting to kind of see his opportunity there. But look, he he has the opportunity to really be like a top 3 corner for us this year, and getting him back will be a huge impact for us.
Yeah.
Um, I think one of the guys that I was potentially looking at for us there, was Jackson out of Oregon. Played with Gonzo a little bit. He's got nice size. Again, as I went through some of these mocks earlier, I think he's coming in on the PFF big board. I want to say around
67
88,
here.
67, right?
Yep.
So again, somebody where, depending on how that board falls and how some of the offensive positions shake out earlier in the draft, is that somebody that they think is an impact guy enough to move up? More than likely not, right? But
Mhm.
if he were to fall, he would be somebody that I like, because look, he's got good size. I think he's 6'3",
Yeah.
200. And when you pair him with somebody, if you were to pair him with somebody like Christian Gonzalez, I mean, when you think about like the wide receiver, it's a wide receiver league now,
Well,
right?
and
I mean,
especially the
and
AFC East,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like, look at everything you've seen with Miami. A lot of people love, right? Like the Jets getting another guy. Obviously, Buffalo's going to have to stack up, just losing Gabe
yep.
Davis. You need at least two corners in our division just to survive.
Exactly. Right. And who knows? And we might see, you know, I saw Jeremiah's recent mock today where he has the Jets jumping up and grabbing Harrison Jr. at 5, right? Like, so
Lord.
who knows? Yeah, tell me about it. But who
Yeah,
knows,
Mike.
right? Like we could see somebody like, whether it's Neighbors going to, the Chargers, or maybe the Jets do try and jump up for somebody like even if they don't jump all the way up for Harrison, maybe they try and jump up for like a Rome or something. But it
Mhm.
looks like not only the wide receivers that are already in the AFC, but the guys that might be added here,
Yeah.
are definitely somebody that we got to think about.
Yeah. So that would be one position that if they do end up moving up for, as much as I'd be like, ah, damn, I would have loved a wide receiver there. I could kind of get it just because at the end of the day, if you have to get out of your own division before you go make into the playoffs and everything else. And yeah, the Dolphins, we already know the Jets with Mike Williams, Garrett Wilson, and if they add another elite wide receiver,
Yeah,
Diggs is getting up there, and who knows if he actually likes being there, but they still need
I know.
someone.
Yep.
So I could see it where it might not feel great, and sports radio would have a field day with what are they doing? But as a team building wise, I can kind of see it, especially if it's a reactionary move, which I don't know if that's the best idea. But if we see Buffalo or the Jets make a wide receiver splash, I could kind
Yep.
of understand why we would have to do it.
Yeah, and again, Dan, I think it really kind of speaks to this is something that would be more in play if we ended up kind of moving down and acquiring
Yes.
some later draft capital, right? Like I think
Yep.
that's really kind of what we're looking at here. What about some of the guys for you that kind of jumped out a little bit from a defensive back standpoint?
Yeah, I was looking at some again as the continuation of it goes. Some later round guys, Johnny Dixon out of Penn State, fifth or sixth rounder. I think he was 5'10", if I remember correctly. Jarvis Brownlee Jr. out of Louisville. Um, they were all like 5'10", 5'11", 6'1", these three guys here. It was interesting. So Bleacher Report projected him as like a seventh rounder, but a lot of teams have brought him in as they're within like their top 30 visits. NFL Draft Buzz had him like in the fourth, so he's kind of all over the place. I'm not sure where PFF had him. Um, but one guy that I liked as well, that also Kyle Larson, our big college guy for the Undroppables, got in my ear about, was Kamal Hayden from Tennessee. He's a good player, and he had a season-ending shoulder injury, which is kind of dropping him down into maybe that fourth, fifth round, which could present some pretty potential really good value there. But those are three guys, again, day three guys that have some good size, some good length, play a little bit of slot, play a little bit of outside. That again is a nice depth piece that could play up within a year or two.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, because look, in all in theory, right? Like you've got your kind of top three set, and very very kind of unlikely that anybody that we're drafting that range is probably going to end up usurping one of those top three guys.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think look, depth piece, planning for the future. Again, there's that kind of common theme about how we just start kind of planning ahead and building out, right? Because
Yep.
this is something that, building out both sides of the ball, not just via free agency and being able to spend that money elsewhere if we hit on some of these draft picks, is going to be really nice, especially if we end up, getting that rookie quarterback on that rookie deal. The more places that we can hit on some of those rookie picks and allow us to spend money elsewhere would be really nice, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Kamal Hayden
um,
was the 6'1", 200. So
okay,
good size
good
guy. And
size,
PFF has him at 191, right? Which I think some of that has to do with the injury piece of it. So again, he
sure,
presents some potentially really nice value there.
yep. And then if we jump to let's keep it with the defensive backs, but let's kind of move over to safety a little bit, right?
Mm,
So, it's an area that I think I probably, if they did go defensive back, I would almost rather they kind of look at safety
mhm,
as opposed to cornerback. Obviously we're going through the transition tag with Duggar right now. Hopefully they can kind of work something out with him long term. But if they can't, and that this kind of may speak to, if we see them go safety kind of in this range here, maybe
mhm.
they do have some concerns about not being able to sign him long term, right? If they do take a safety a little bit higher. But Dan, one of the safeties that you liked was Cole Bishop out of Utah, right?
Yeah, yeah. Freak athlete.
Yeah,
If you He has a 9.87 RAS, which whether or not you know about it, just think of zero. It says scoring of 0 to 10, and 10 is like the ideal, like perfect athlete. And he's right there. So he's a great 6'2", 207. Um, what was it? 4.45 40. Great 20-yard split, great 10-yard splits, solid vertical. Like he's just a big dude, fast, right? And he's someone with like that explosion and like the closing speed and his tackling. Like that's someone that you, as much as we want Duggar back, you do have to prepare for the fact that like if he wants to test free agency and somebody wants to throw him the bag, you can't always stop that. We just saw that with Calvin Ridley, right?
exactly.
The reports were like we weren't all that far behind Tennessee, and then Tennessee went over the top. And like we talked about, it's just like honestly, I don't think I would have loved us paying that money. We could have afforded it, sure, but it's not a great contract. If someone wants to do that with Duggar, we can't stop it. So getting someone like Cole Bishop could be a nice insurance piece and just a good player in general.
Did you see that earlier, by the way, on Calvin Ridley, that Kraft said that they tried to make up the
Oh,
taxes and everything like that?
he's talking between he's like, oh, he was going to come here, but his girlfriend wanted to stay in the South.
I know.
And then like his whole thing was just like, oh, I didn't know that our facilities were so bad. That's shocking to me. How would you not know?
I
How do
know.
you not know? And also pretty sure last year their equipment room also got like a horseshit rating too. So it's not like, oh, an F. Oh my God, this has never happened. I'm pretty sure they got an F in it last year too. So what are we doing?
Yeah, I know. There's some between that and some of the, essentially dynasty that turned into
Oh,
basically a Bill Belichick hit piece, the
yeah.
second half there.
Yeah.
There's some questions around kind of ownership and what's going on at the head of Foxborough right now.
I
But
guess the only good thing is, right, he's a rich guy that wants people to like him. So, I mean, he said he's going to
yeah,
pony up 50 million to build a whole new gym. So maybe we can bully him into spending his money and
I
not
mean,
on.
seriously, if that's what it takes, if it takes a couple bad report cards to do that, then so be it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I will say in his defense, like a little bit, um, it speaks to the fact that like, look, if you account for the money that we have spent, Dan, and then like the what we did try and go spend,
Yeah.
like we were at least in the ballpark for Ridley. Like
Hmm.
we would have been quite up there from an overall spending standpoint. But I think you and I are both kind of on that same wavelength of like, look, I'm not necessarily super like brokenhearted that they missed out on Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
Um, so jumping back into the safeties here, there's two more guys that I kind of came across here. So one of them is kind of a do-it-all guy, or let's call it a Swiss Army a little bit. And I think if Bill was here, somebody that he would probably really like is Sion Diaki,
Hmm.
another Utah guy, right? So
Yep.
played some running back in college, but also played some safety. Um, a little bit on the smaller side, well, kind of from a height perspective, 6 feet, but he's 208.
Yep.
Um, really nice coverage grade, right? So when you think about somebody that can, whether it's some of the seam stuff with some of the tight end, the more
Yep.
athletic tight ends that we're starting to see with like a Dalton Kincaid,
Yep.
maybe he could match up with somebody like that.
Hmm.
Um, you know, 69 coverage grade is definitely on the upper echelon for some of the safeties in this range here. So he's a guy that I definitely had an eye on, and the other guy was Cameron Kitchens. Kind of in that same sort of thing, right? 6 feet, 205. 65 coverage grade, via PFF. So in the run game, 57 run defensive grade here, but uh, he's a pretty good athlete.
Yep.
He's not going to blow anybody away or anything like that, but he's he as a true freshman, he played in all 12 games,
That's
started the
huge.
final five. Yeah, he was a full-time starter in 22 and 23. So it's a guy that's like got experience. So again, at this point in the draft, there is an interesting note here with his ranges from a single high roll is good, but a big boon is that his anticipation um, is rare for some of the athletic ability that he has, right? So maybe kind of a boomer bust guy a little bit.
Yep.
But look, again, at this point in the draft, I wouldn't hate it if they went that route from a safety perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting somebody in because the depth side of it is safety
Yeah, do you want to pull
is
that up?
yeah, I mean, Duggar and Jabril Peppers is good, but Jabril is also he's a little bit older. Right? He's at 28. But then from there, right, Brendan Schooler is really he's a special teams guy.
Special
And then we
teams
don't
guy, yeah.
really have we're actually pretty light on safeties. Jalen
Yeah.
Hawkins, Josh Bledsoe, who's another kind of more of a special teamer type deal. We we might need to spend up on a safety.
Yeah. And look, I think honestly, probably given his athletic profile, Cole Bishop, and relative cost kind of
Hmm.
versus the other two guys here, he's probably going to be a little bit cheaper.
Yep.
He's a guy that I would love to see them bring in. But yeah, I think you're kind of right with that departure of Adrian Phillips.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not like we love Jalen Mills or anything like that, but Jalen Mills is gone, JC Jackson's gone. So just from a versatility standpoint, you can't really put guys in all the different seats that they were before. And look, we kind of talked about it with Mapu a little bit, but Jabril's kind of also that hybrid role, right? He's not
Yeah.
really like a
Yeah.
true safety, right? He'll come down and play linebacker and he can be a bit of a thumper, but I would like to see them maybe get more of a coverage guy back there and at least would also give them, maybe plan for life after Duggar if that's the case, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So looking at their depth chart a little bit more, it's a position of need.
Yeah.
Maybe not a full starter, but yeah, you're right. Like Peppers is that hybrid. So it's kind of like when who was the dude from the Jets that went to Seattle? Jamal Adams. Like he's
Jamal
a
Adams, yeah.
safety, but he wasn't a safety. And I'm
Exactly.
not saying Jabril Peppers is just that, but he's along those lines where we don't have a center fielder by any means. Like the McCourty, we don't have a McCourty anymore.
Exactly. No, and look, I mean, I kind of mentioned his name earlier, but with guys like Dalton Kincaids of the world and everything like that you have in your division that you're going to have to account for, especially with some of these, again, another rule change, right? With some of the hip drop stuff, where that's really going to lend itself to. I saw something the other day. Apologies, can't remember who had posted it, but actually, it was shout out Andrew Cooper, Coupe Fiasco on Twitter.
Yeah.
He, yeah, me too. Love Coop. Great follow. But one of the things that he kind of threw out there was some screens for tight ends, right? Because really that's where we kind of saw that's how Mark Andrews got hurt, right? Is some of that in the flats area for tight ends. So having the ability for a safety to kind of come down, match up with a tight end like that, and not only cover them, but also have some size to be able to take them down, without kind of worrying about that hip drop or anything like that. I do think that's valuable. So yeah, it's just kind of, I think we've just kind of talked ourselves into, we need a safety.
I think so. Yeah. And even though all the guys we just talked about, 207, 205, 208, someone like Mark Andrews is 250, right? So that's where you get that, again, that the who can tackle is massive because you're at a 40 to 50 pound like weight disadvantage. You got to be able to pop because what else do you do?
Well, and I think, look, when you look at some of the things that have kind of happened from a defensive standpoint around the league, right? Like, what have we seen that's really kind of impacted scoring overall? Is a lot of it is the Fangio defense and that too high safety look, right? So it's really the league has evolved into, okay, we're not going to let you beat us deep, and you're going to have to really work for it underneath here, so to speak. So, I mean, look, there's obviously no one in this range that, is near the impact player of like an Antoine Winfield or like a Kyle Hamilton, but you can see what those impact guys at safety can do for teams and their versatility and what it allows them to do from a coverage perspective, right?
Yeah. So I think you nailed it. We talked ourselves into needing a safety.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what they do. Then again, another reason why if we do end up trading down and, maybe they are able to, if we kind of take another look at the board here, right? If we look at safeties, I just want to kind of pull this back up as we're here. If they do end up adding draft capital kind of in that second, third round, maybe pick something up in addition to future firsts or something like that. Does that bring you in play for somebody like a Jaden Hicks, right? Like out of Washington State, 6'3", 212, coming in at number 61 on the big board. Again, this would only be in a situation if you added draft capital. But when you look at some of the coverage grades and his ability to kind of be that versatile player, it's, I want a safety, dude. I want a safety.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right. Let's move to and again, I don't want to spend too much time here, Dan, because when you think about what we did and how we kind of addressed it, you actually had the best note in our show sheet. You want to go ahead and share it?
Yeah, so when Dan and I are talking about like, all right, we'll go by defensive positions and then just running backs as a whole. So for defensive positions, like I wrote up some guys, what I thought, running backs, my lone bullet point was, honestly, I don't care. No one before round 5.
Exactly.
I don't care.
I mean, look, I'm in agreement with you, Dan. I think we've got plenty of other needs. In addition to the offensive side of the ball and skill positions, we just basically said that identified quite a big need in safety there. So look, I'm with you. I really don't want to address this position kind of more than, and you and I were talking about this a little bit before the show, but I'll kind of mention it here as well. Is I really wonder how many impact running backs are kind of in this draft, right? I think when you look at, some of their situations from a college perspective, a lot of them have dealt with multiple pretty significant injuries. There's really only a few guys that I like. And at least, from a real talent perspective of like, can you build on them for the future? I think a lot of these guys are going to be rotational running backs at this point in this draft, especially when you have, look, you've got somebody like Ramondre in there for us. went and got somebody like Antonio Gibson to bring in to kind of pair with him. So
Mhm.
really, if we do draft a running back, it's probably for life after Ramondre, right? I mean, that's kind of what you're potentially looking at. Would you agree?
Yeah, and even draft like there's no one here that like makes me think of like, oh, we can I don't know. Will Shipley, there's our life after Mondre, right? There's no
Yeah.
one, especially where I think we should be looking at a running back. There's no one there that I'm like, oh, that's the guy. Now, obviously, there's almost guaranteed there'll be one person from round 4 through 7 that is a smash running back. But again, and I'm not even a running backs don't matter person, but
Yep.
for us and our team needs right now, they don't. And a lot of it is just what is the scheme and who are frankly, what's the offensive line look like? Where
Yeah.
we have to do way more work on the offensive line to take one of these random running backs, Isaac Guriendo, who I do like. Um, I think that the Patriots have met with Dylan Laub. I don't know if that's just because he's from New Hampshire, so they're trying to, help a brother out there. But like none of these guys, like, yeah, they're depth pieces. They should be our running back 3. I like Antonio Gibson. I don't care what Michael Felger says. I've heard of him. I pay
Yeah.
attention to the NFL.
Yeah.
So like Mondre's good. Gibson's a good player. We also still have Kevin Harris, JaMychal Hasty, Keyshawn Vaughn. Again, none of them are world beaters, but like we have enough bodies in there that like, yeah, bring in a young guy that might be able to out, outpass all of them and become our RB3, but it's not a position of need. It really isn't.
No.
Honestly, I could see us going UDFA and I wouldn't care.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I think really for me, I'm largely in agreement, right? Like no one that I can see back down here is really going to kind of supplant Ramondre this year, unless there's obviously injuries or anything like that, right? But I do
Yeah.
think, Ramondre is going to be an unrestricted free agent next year.
Okay.
And I do think he'll be 26 going into next year, Dan. I
Yeah, I
mean,
think
going into next
so.
season. Um, I have a hard time believing we would invest in somebody like him, just kind of given our track record with some other guys. But look, it would depend
27.
on. He's going to be 27 next year.
Yeah, he's 26 right now.
Yeah. So I mean, look, 27. Like you got to think, like, unless he's got. If we see something like we saw from him, like if he can stay healthy, and we
Mhm.
really kind of see the combination of what when he was healthy these last 2 years, if he can put together a full season of that, um, he's probably looking at like a Tony Pollard type contract next year or something like that, right? Like
Mhm.
a guy who's got an ability to catch the ball, who's pretty decent in pass pro, but a guy that I probably don't see us doing that for, right? Like I don't necessarily know if that's something that we kind of entertain.
Yeah, that is one to be, a big thing with the regime change is just like how do they value the position? Because we've known
Yeah,
Bill, right? Besides Corey Dillon, right? It just wasn't a priority for him. I don't know. Yeah, I don't see us giving Tony Pollard
type money.
8 million a year, 9 million a year. I mean, I guess you could say with the cap has gone up and like will again go up probably another 10 million next year. I guess it all balances out like percentage wise, but I don't know if we're gonna value him that highly.
And look, I think some of it depends, Dan, on what he's able to do in kind of this Van Pelt offense, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's the big question mark there too.
yeah. So I mean, look, if he's a guy that shows that he can be kind of relied on a little bit, and maybe if Gibson's able to kind of lighten his load a little bit. So when you think about, an overall volume perspective and he can stay
Mhm.
healthy for a full year, maybe it's the type of situation where he does like Gerard. He does like what Alex Van Pelt has put in, and maybe he's not looking for that huge payday on the open market. It's kind of hard not to think that way.
Yeah.
But that could be an option to bring him back there. I think two of the guys though that I would think about from a later round perspective, right? So I've done some work on some of the running backs. Again, there's not necessarily anybody that I'm in love with, but I do think there's a couple players that I think are interesting. And actually one of the guys that, not necessarily from a true like size perspective or anything like that, but one of the guys that does remind me of Ramondre a little bit, because remember Ramondre was a 4th round pick,
Yep.
right? So one of the guys that does remind me of him a little bit is Kamani Vidal.
Okay.
He's a little bit smaller than Ramondre, right? I think he's coming in about 210, 215. Um, uh, on a given day, maybe he's closer to 217. Obviously, Ramondre's in that 225 kind of,
Yep.
build. But was a Ramondre, his calling card in college was he was a really good pass blocker. And
Yep.
he was also an underrated pass catcher that we kind of saw bear fruit immediately.
Yep.
And Kamani Vidal is arguably the best pass protection running back in this draft. And he's a guy that's done it for multiple years, and he's shown an ability to catch the ball. And it does seem like, from a landing spot perspective, it does seem like he's more of he's got talent because, he's got elusiveness. The way he runs, he can run kind of both man gap and zone. Um, but given the fact that, like, if we're thinking about life after Ramondre and something that, what's a quarterback's best friend, right? Is a pass protection running back that can leak out and catch the ball, right? So if we're thinking about, of course, we've got Gibson here to do some pass catching, but I
Mhm.
would not hate a guy who's got, like, right now about a 5th round grade on him, potentially 6th round grade. A guy like Kamani Vidal, obviously he's got some miles on him.
Mhm.
But he's definitely a name that, look, if we landed him later on in the draft, I wouldn't be disappointed.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
any
and
thoughts
that's
on? Yeah, go ahead.
no, I mean, that's that I'm with you. Like, I know Jax talks about him all the time too, so I've heard his name, quite a bit.
Ass
But yeah,
mask, Kamani Vidal.
yeah, like it's one of those things where like, yeah, sure, I'm cool. Like I'm happy with it. And just
Yeah.
for what it's worth, right? Looking at next year for free agency running backs besides Mondre, um, Javonte Williams, 24, so gets younger. That'd be interesting. If we want to go a little bit older, but someone that we know works very well in the Alex Van Pelt offense, Nick Chubb is a UFA.
Mhm.
So, like, do you want to pay a 30-year-old running back? No, but we know it works.
Yeah,
So
he'll probably be
again,
cheap too.
yeah, he would probably be cheap, and he's a freak, and I love Nick Chubb. So
Yeah.
it's again, I'm with you. Like any name you throw out there, for the most part, I'm going to be like, yeah, sure. Like as long as it's like not something dumb, like we're reaching on Dylan Lobb in like the 4th round, and nothing against him. Like he's just not a 4th round draft pick. Like as long as it makes sense, I'm cool with it. It's just running back is so far removed from where I think we need to be focused as like an organization that yeah, get a depth piece. Kamani Vidal's cool. Guriendo, like I said, I'd like his speed. He would be maybe that 4th, 5th round, which is like, maybe not, but like interesting athlete. But a lot of these guys, Dylan Johnson, Tyrone Tracy, like I just for me, it's just like a level of like, I don't care. It's just
Yeah. Look, I get
I'm
it.
so more focused on like other players and other positions that any name you say or any name that anyone says, I'm like, okay, sure. That's
Yeah.
fine.
No, I mean, look, I get it. We've definitely got more areas of need there. I do
Yep.
think it's a little bit interesting as far as just let's tie off Kamani here. There was one thing that
Mhm.
I just kind of wanted to mention on him is that I think one of the things that was exciting about him, in addition to his pass pro ability and also, um, his ability to kind of run into different schemes and also catch the ball out of the backfield, he makes guys miss, man. I mean,
Mhm.
94 missed tackles, this past season kind of led the nation. And look, smaller school in Troy, but had one of the best seasons kind of in G5 like kind of history there.
Yep.
Um, so that was really kind of nice to see. And then look, from a Dylan Law perspective, I'm with you on the fact that, look, I don't think the only way I would be entertaining somebody like him is if you kind of had the idea of to use him in almost like a Swiss Army knife kind of positionless role, right? Like he's
Yep.
obviously not and that's where I just don't know if he fits for somebody like us, right? Like, you know, super creative play caller where you can kind of get him in space and, have
Mhm.
him rotate out of the backfield, line up in the slot a little bit and everything like that. I do think that guy has value on the right NFL team.
Yep.
I just don't know if that NFL team is ours.
Yeah.
Um, and then the last guy here, Dan, is just again late flyer Isaiah Davis. Again,
Mhm.
smaller school, South Dakota State, uber productive guy, bigger guy too. About 220, over 6 feet. So does a really nice job of catching the ball. Actually had one of the better missed tackles forced per reception out of all running backs for his college career. So again, he's kind of a multifaceted guy. He's not as good in pass protection as Kamani Vidal, but he can hold his own.
Yep.
So look, you talk about later flyer guys. They've got some tread on them, but look, they're productive guys, and it's in their situations in college, even though they came from smaller schools, they did everything they could have been asked of and more. And
Mhm.
at that price point, like, sure, I'll take a flyer on that at that relative cost.
Yeah, and just even watching a couple of videos like from before and even right now, like yeah, he's a hard runner. He looks good. Like yeah, I'm in. Like I actually think the Patriots met with him. If I think I remember seeing his name out in one of the meetings or planned meetings. So like, cool. I'm down.
Well, it makes sense because it does, he is, as opposed to, Vidal, who kind of he did a really nice job in both man and gap and zone.
Yep.
Isaiah Davis is kind of much more of a zone scheme fit, and
Yep.
that's what Van Pelt kind of brings
Yeah.
over, right? So I'm not surprised that he would be a guy that's kind of on our list, and is able to catch some dump offs in traffic and everything like that. So
Yeah.
um,
And finding again our linemen that understand it, so we don't have to try to teach offensive linemen on the fly on how to teach an entirely new blocking
yeah,
system. Like running backs that understand it too. Yeah, it goes a long way.
yeah, it does. I mean, look, and I'm not saying by any means, um, that the offense that Van Pelt that he's bringing over is going to be anything like what some of the Shanahan tree runs, but we've
Mhm.
seen that when you get guys that are comfortable in those certain types of offenses, you can bring in guys that aren't necessarily heralded guys or big
Yeah.
time guys, and they can have success, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
um,
Dolphins this year. 20
yeah,
touchdowns.
exactly, man. Exactly. Yeah. Look at Raheem Mostert.
Yeah,
Shout out
it's
Raheem
insane.
Mostert. All right, man. Well, I think that about covers it. Anything else that you wanted to kind of just touch base on here from, defense or anything like that from a draft perspective?
No, I think it really just boils down to is like we definitely need to be talking about people need to understand that we will be putting like draft picks in at the defensive position and potentially early as round 3, but probably more towards round 4,
Yep.
because it's still as much as our defense is our strength, like you can't just let it go until it becomes bad again. So there's guys out there that we both really like, Kamara, Cole Bishop, like, there's guys out there that I think can make a big impact, even though they're not going to be super costly for us to acquire, which I think is huge. So, again, as we could run a mock draft where it's like Drake May and then wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, and it's a
Yeah.
ton of fun, right? But if the idea is we're building out our team to really compete, and again, like you said, we're in year 1 of the rebuild. People just need to relax a little bit and understand, like, to build the team, you have to build it in all dimensions, in all areas. So like, let's take a breath, Patriots Nation. It's okay. Um, we're going to draft some of these guys, and there's a good reason for it because we are trying to make the entire team better. It can't just be wide receiver infusion, and that's it.
Totally agree, man. Totally agree. And that's where, look, I think some of Patriots Nation is probably going to struggle with that big picture kind of 30,000 foot view.
Yep.
Um, so we're going to have to try and portray that as much as we can, Dan, and get on our soapbox here these next few
Yep.
months to try and do that. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this draft plays out. I think what we're thinking about next, Dan, is really starting to get into some of the offensive line targets, right?
Yep.
Because it's one of our biggest areas of need. Is even though we brought back on Wenu, we've got question marks of previous guys that we've drafted. We've got an aging David Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
I already want Tanner Bortolini from Wisconsin
Yep.
to be the David Andrews replacement, but
Yeah.
we'll
I've done
eventually
a few
get
mocks
there.
with him.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm already in. So yeah, I think next show, guys, that's what we're going to be focusing on. We'll probably move over to offensive line, and that's going to be a lot more interactive. We're thinking, right?
Yep.
We want to have some clips up for you guys. For anybody that's watching here on YouTube, we want to have some clips up for you. And who knows, we may have a special guest for you guys as well to kind of come through and talk through some prospects. So
There's a tease.
there's a tease. All right. Well, guys, thank you. Appreciate you tuning in for episode 3 of Patriots Uncovered here. And Dan, thank you, my friend. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Sounds good. See you, everybody.